Union Arena's set design is very different compared to your more traditional card games like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, or Yu-Gi-Oh! In those games, as you go from set 1 to set 2 to set 3, you naturally see a power creep increase or new mechanics and depth that get added to the game that increase the strategies kind of set by set, year by year. So as these games kind of get up in scale, there's a very natural progression that you can follow. However, with Union Arena being more of an IP battler style of game, anytime a new IP enters the fold, like Evangelion that was announced more recently, you have to reset what that set 1 is because you can only use the cards in that set. So as the game goes on, as we get more and more IPs that are joining, how do you really determine what is a tier 1 deck? What are kind of the criteria that set one deck apart from another if they're all truly the same set 1 design, right? This is a question that I've been getting asked a lot, and maybe definitely from my tier list that I put together, or vibes list, I got to start calling it because people are taking it quite too literally. But in today's video, I want to give you 3 different criteria that I personally look for as I'm putting these together to try to determine what is maybe tier 1 and 1.5 versus some of those other decks. So with that out of the way, let's dive in and give you a look at what does tier 1 mean in Union Arena. So first and foremost, we do have to start with my tier list, vibe list, whatever we're calling it, but I try to change this up because I do think that there is a separate conversation between which tier 1 deck do you take, because it's very easy to pilot. It's a very easy deck that does the same thing turn after turn after turn, versus some of those other decks that are still tier 1 or 1.5, but do take a little bit more work or a little bit more, mental stress, as it were, to make them achieve that same level of success, right? So for me, looking at these first two, between easy picks and tops a regional, this would be all of my tier 1 and 1.5 criteria. These decks are clearly a stand above some of the other decks that we have. Now, again, in Union Arena, a lot of these other decks can be quite viable, it turns out, as we get a little bit more into matchup spreads mattering. However, I do think that there is a very clear case that I'll hopefully elaborate on well enough in this video within those first 2 picks. And of course, beyond that, right, we get more into our tier 2, tier 2.5 categories, and then ultimately tier 3 for, here for a good time, tier 3 and below, if you will, that they are just missing too many pieces. And if you know me, I still love the blue bomber deck from Hunter x Hunter. It is still, in my opinion, the most fun deck to play because of the way Risky Dice works and setting up the top of your deck for, these big combo plays. And there's some other decks that have gotten us closer as more launches have certainly come and gone. But it is something that is still near and dear to my heart, even if it does fall off quite a bit. So with that out of the way, let's dive into the 3 key areas, again, that I primarily look for, or that I think truly set these decks apart. Up first, we have to talk about defensive raids. Yes, as the game goes on, and as we've seen time and time again, primarily we are trying to progress our own game plan. Raids are the great way of doing that because it is ultimately meant to be the boss cards of your decks. However, some of them are just strictly better than others when we think about what does this mean from a defensive, meaning your opponent's attacking you and you get this out of life, how good can they be? And as we're going through this video, I did mostly just organize these as like good, better, best, to the best of my ability. Again, this is all opinion at the end of the day, but starting off, just to kind of walk through the process of this, right? Ichigo, this is one that has been a staple ever since Union Arena launched, that it is just a free body that you can then remove something. And so one of the most important aspects of this as well is that some raids will have a on-play ability, but then only get that benefit if it happens on that turn. So anytime that you can get a free action point and just play out the raid and then get value on top of it, that is just pushing you ahead among all these other decks. And Ichigo, while is meeting the criteria of a defensive card, is something that if our opponent attacks us, we're going to get it out of life, and it is going to remove a threat in general, either by protecting our life or straight removal. Let's say you only shrink something down by 2k, but it's your last attacker, and then Ichigo can clearly block it, right? However, to really get the most out of this, you really want to make sure that you are hitting that kind of 4K threshold for removal, or 5K if they have a bigger body. So this one does require a little bit more setup in that regard. Yuji being a little bit better than that, it is, again, with 4K being 99% of the time going to hit. It is a bit better. Bouncing to your opponent's hand is just as good as removal in this game 9 out of 10 times, and it is still just a 4K body that we can play and then attack with on our turn and feel very good about it. Now, the one that I think might catch a lot of people off guard is, as I just talked about those two previous cards, then why do I have Gawain as the third pick, or in my opinion, the best raid that you could possibly hit? And that's strictly because the ceiling for each one of these, right? The best that Ichigo is going to do is hit a 4K or 5K body, right? But that requires a ton of setup. 99 times out of 100, Yuji is just going to be strictly better and just always have a 4K that you're happy to bounce. But then Gawain, when you hit it out of your opponent's first life and you very quickly shut off every single other attack that they possibly had lined up for that turn, again, shrinking their board from 4K to 3K in the vast majority of situations, you suddenly just gain 3 life out of nowhere from this one card, where the Ichigo and Yuji, by most, again, comparative reasons, is only going to save you 1 life. So Gawain, again, if you are able to hit it at the right time, the ceiling is just so much higher. And especially if they were trying to line up some like double attack shenanigans, that can also play a key role in just Gawain being able to shut that down and save you potentially even more life in that regard. So again, it does depend on what their front line is looking like versus if they're trying to just cheat up a 3K from the back line. If it's something like Asuna, they're still going to get that plus 1K buff, so they're still going to have one 4K attack, but it is still going to save you the most amount of life at the end of the day. And of course, we got to talk about Asta, as I talked about through this section, those defensive raids. Now, it doesn't have an on play that can help us. We do have the option to use it as a block if we really want to, but by nature of Union Arena being a more tempo and aggressive focused game, you need to make sure that you're having these 4K consistent attackers. So to play this as a raid and then immediately have to sacrifice it, while it may buy you a turn, can feel really bad, and that is why it does not make the criteria for these other comparisons, right? Not all raids are equal, and truly the power from some decks, you know, that one key defensive raid out of turn can turn the tide of battle, especially as someone who's been blown out by Gawain too many times. That is a card that still haunts me to this day, and probably a key reason why we still see it doing so well. Now, of course, another large part of this is going to be consistency pieces. How often can you do the thing that your deck wants to be doing? What pieces do you have, or what cards do you have to really help you get there? And one of my favorite examples still is Neon. This is a card in the Kurapika deck that, while it doesn't have a trigger, and that's something that we're going to talk about next, it still gives you the double energy piece, so it fits the exact criteria that you want to be looking for, and then it also allows you to play something and effectively give it haste. So it allows you to immediately set up a pressure unit to get in a point of damage, or in some cases, it just helps you find that key raid piece that you're missing out on, and then you get Snipe. However, that is a 5 energy card, and while it does lend itself quite well to what the green decks want to be doing, something that is going to be a little bit better is the 1 energy Kirito. It's something that you can play early. It doesn't have this heavy restriction of waiting until, you know, turn 3, turn 4 sometimes to line it up properly. This helps smooth out your energy. It finds the key raid pieces that you want. Tutors basically the entire deck, that what you care about, and you do get that card that you're hopefully going for. However, you do have to discard something, being some part of the downside. Now, the one that still, in my opinion, from a what does it unlock within the deck's capability is Esper Sisters. The fact that, yes, it is an event, so you're not getting a body behind it, which is the downside, but because we have ways to play the card for free in the deck or recycle extra cards to get even more consistency added on, the fact that this adds 2 cards and finds quite often the exact 2 cards that you want is pretty insane, and I don't think that we are going to see a better consistency piece anytime soon compared to Esper Sisters and what it wants to be doing, right? When you start to combo this with the Hellish Blizzard, so you can just discard the 2 cards if you don't want them, if you're going for consistency pieces, or if you're just trying to get this for free off Terrible Tornado to find the other pieces and continue looping your effects, this just drips with value in how much you're able to really extend out your game plan. And then I do got to give a special shout out to Boros, that this is where we start to get of what is the line, right? What is going too far in one direction or the other, where It's either good enough, it meets the criteria in compared to the other three that we just talked about, or does it just fall a little bit short? And Boros is an interesting card because it is one that allows you to use your life as a resource and get a ton of extra draw out of it. However, this is a card that in a lot of matchups, you will not ever get to play the second one, where the three other decks, as I talked about, are very good, and you're often very happy to see multiple of them in the right times. So Boros is an interesting one that, it is a May, so we don't always have to use it. It does have a raid that still benefits from playing this double energy, so it lines itself quite well into that criteria again. But to get the most out of this, you do have to take a life, and in a more aggressive matchup, it can be a lethal mistake to take one extra life when you didn't plan on it. And then also in the monsters deck for Red One Punch Man, we do have some other cards that allow us to take even more life to draw more cards. But again, I do think that's the threshold for how reliable is it within the deck, while still drawing us a ton of cards is not something that we can often repeat all that well. So it does feel a little bit bad, but we'll have to wait and see where this goes in the future just from overall consistency pieces. But again, Boros is a card near and dear to my heart. I loved playing that deck. That Red finally got something that lined up a bit better, right, to some of the other Red decks that we've seen in the past. And as long as you can dodge One Punch Man, the deck is insanely good still. So big fan of that as well. And then, of course, one of the last things I want to mention, or for me at the end of the day, it is a best of one game, right? We just have to acknowledge that at some point, your life is going to matter. Now, it's not every time that you're going to get 4 specials in a row out of life and just completely hammer your opponent down, right? However, as we've seen in definitely the better versions of Kurapika, we have seen the 8 extra active cards that get added to just increase that consistency that we are able to save a point of life, right? Every active is effectively 1 life gain because we're able to then get a blocker. So it increases your overall effective life over the course of the game. Now, again, these are all very close. There are going to be some build differences. So anywhere between like 40 to 50 at triggers is what we've seen in a deck. And again, some of these are better than others. The Purple Code Geass deck in particular is more known for their just insane amount of draw triggers, right? And just being able to get the extra consistency that way, which is still a very good thing to have. It increases the consistency of you finding those raids, which is ultimately going to be really important for that deck because it wants to combo them together. The Nanami deck has just a overall good mix of draw and active triggers, and Kurapika is just, I'm trying to play as many of them as possible and has also a little bit better variety compared to the earlier list of Kurapika, which only played, I think, 38 off the top of my head. It was much lower if you didn't play this one specific, as we called it in the past, oops, all triggers style of deck. And then on the other hand, you will have decks that just do not have them. So I use the Mojito example where there are just key cards in that deck archetype that you have to play, like the Junpei here, that unfortunately don't have a trigger. So we are less likely to get something out of our life. Again, be it an active, be it, we're always playing the 4 special, so that's at least a guaranteed. But there are other pieces that we are missing out on, again, namely active and draw triggers that do overall decrease the consistency or let us take 1 extra point of damage that we really wish we didn't have to take. Now, there are a lot of other decks that fall into this category where you have anywhere between like the 25 to 35 range, which even at 35, it is a bit better. But it always comes down to what is your consistency piece that you have, right? What is going to be the element that allows you to draw extra cards so that you don't always have to rely on your life to kind of get you there. But it is without a doubt something that I believe is worth mentioning just because of how many extra active triggers you can often put in a deck, which really do matter. And if you have a double blocker, that value is going to skyrocket, which I said there's only going to be 3. I lied. I'm sorry. There's 4. I have to give an honorable mention here to the double blockers in the game. Now, this is one that is not as straightforward as those 3 other elements that I've just talked about, because this is also then the question of how good is my double block by itself? Does it have raid fodder that we care about? Does it have a color trigger that we might care about, spoiler like Gojo does? And how many active triggers do we really have, right? This is definitely a key piece that if your opponent is trying to set up more aggressive lines and you hit that active trigger when you really need it, these double block cards are going to completely shut down their game plan. However, it's just not as consistent for a variety of reasons. The new 4K being the wall. We're not seeing as many 3K attackers anymore, right? There's a lot to consider here, but it is still a key piece with the active triggers in a lot of these decks. And so, Genos, right, it is something that is played in the One Punch Man yellow deck at the end of the day. It lines up quite well off of the special SR effect to get to play one for free, especially for that case. And it also is just something that we have for a raid fodder, right? Jeremiah just going into having step as well is super important for the green Lancelot deck because it allows you to move it to the front line. If your opponent pushed up a bunch of 2Ks, now suddenly you have a double blocker, while also then being able to step it back or move it back to your energy line to get the most value out of it. And then maybe I'm a little bit biased because JJK Volume 2 is next month, or this month. God, it's already June. Sorry. But having the color trigger, having the extra protection built into the card, I am absolutely in love with this version of Double Block. Even if it costs an extra energy, which can be a downside, this is one that kind of checks all the boxes that you really want it to. And again, yellow just having the strongest, or potentially strongest, I should say, color trigger. I know most people will say, but it obviously depends on the board state, does speak a lot to the card overall. So with that all the way, you might be wondering then, we've talked about all the key points. Well, how does Union Arena evolve as a game then, right? How do we look to future sets, and what does, at the end of the day, power creep look like, right? A set 1 launch or a new IP launched in 2024 is going to look quite different than the set 1 launch of, say, Evangelion in 2026. And so that's where I took a look at the JP format just to see where things were going. So if you've been following the meta, Foulbot is probably going to eat a ban. Let's just call it like it is. It is doing very nasty things. And it really comes down to just certain cards that are getting kind of pushed together or melded onto a single card, on top of having a 4,500 BP, making it a very good effective blocker when the field is by and large a bunch of 4Ks. And then on top of that, with having damage too, there is this freeze effect that we've seen repeated in recent sets in JPUA that says this character right here cannot attack or block until your next turn. Now, this does follow very closely to the Rukia that we got in the most recent set of Bleach, but she is a bit more conditional for what you want to be doing because you really want the permalock if you're lining this up. So it does require you to play some 2 AP cards first to really get the most out of it. And when we have this Titan Bow that is pressuring 2 damage and often damage 2 impact 1 behind it, getting to freeze something and then force your opponent to sacrifice something else is going to be a huge swing. Now, beyond that, we've talked about a lot of searchers that always force you to discard other than Esper Sisters, and restoring your energy line is also a very important aspect of some of these higher energy costed decks. And the Foulbot, the 5 energy one, just says, hey, play this card for free, right? Get your energy back. And of course, in the future, they might add even more Loki cards that have other effects for when you're playing them and get more value. So this will be one that when it gets its next set might be a little bit dangerous, but it's a long-winded way just to say playing stuff for free is good. We've definitely covered that in our defensive raid section, that anytime that you can cheat a action point, it is going to feel very, very good in this game. So Foulbot definitely gets some value of, again, being a nice high-pressure card. It is a raid, so you have to raid, of course, to get the most out of it, but you are able to play something off of it for extra value. And then lastly, but not least, is Yuna, where you're just getting cards back and getting extra value, right? Anytime that we can add extra cards to our hand for free is going to be good, right? You already want to play this as a raid card. Obviously, it does have a little bit extra design that you want to wait until you have something in your sideline to get back to really get the most out of it. But then it is also able to give you continuous support in getting plus 1K buffs wherever you need it. So from an overall aggressive pushing standpoint, as well as recycling key cards, Yuna really does kind of just do it all, right? So a key theme that I would put towards this conversation is more about just free stuff is good, which of course it is at the end of the day, but it does speak a lot to the trends that we are at least seeing so far. However, you might notice that that is a Volume 2 Sword Art Online card that is a absurdly strong deck in the current meta. So that might be our next ban and limits coming out January 30th, 2026. We will see Sword Art Online Volume 2 joining Union Arena in North America, and it is a very, very strong set. We are very quickly getting to the point where Bandai has done a very, very good job at balancing the North American meta. I want to be very clear about that up front. If you saw the JP format, knew where ours could have been heading, and now where we are today, they've done a wonderful job. However, at some point you have to rip off the Band-Aid, and someone mentioned it, put it that way in the Discord, which is just truly the best way to put it. We can't keep limiting or banning cards to baby step our way up to the Japan format or the Japan strength of decks. And at the same time, it's not fair to Japan, which is going on 3 years now or very soon, of Union Arena, to give them a year 1 and 0.5 set in year 3 for where their meta is at, right? Also, just from a Bandai's perspective, that could potentially hurt sales, and that's not good for Bandai either. So, in my personal opinion, I would not be surprised if this set does not get any bans or limits, and instead the next wave or the next tier of Union Arena style decks, what have you, is going to start with Sword Art Online Volume 2, which, again, I'm very excited because there's some really cool combo style of stuff that you can pull off in newer sets in JPUA that we just don't have here yet, because, again, it would be a tier above everything else. Probably not exactly tier 0, but like 0.5, right? But for, this conversation, might as well be tier 0 decks that we will be seeing in the very near future. So, again, within the next, just looking at my, 7 months, the next 7 months, I absolutely expect some of these IPs that are coming out to no longer get hit and just be like, nope, it's full power and good luck, right? And this is a set that I'm excited for, so yay, I guess, but I just really love again, not IP based, but deck playing based. I really do like Sword Art Online for the archetypes that they have. So we'll see where this one goes. But let me know your thoughts. Do you rate your decks the same way? Is there other aspects of, what makes up tier 1 that you are also looking forward to? Definitely let me know in the comments below. But until next time, more Union Arena in 2 weeks. I got Riftbound to cover next week that I'm very excited for. I'm going to have hopefully a video out tomorrow if I have time to record and all that stuff. But as always, Union Arena is going to be a main focus on this channel. Anytime there's events to cover, I'm going to cover them. Anytime a new set drops, of course, I'm going to drop my 6 deck lists of every set. Going to make sure that there is still stuff coming out in the background. We just have to wait and see when the next release is. So until next time, from my friends, stay safe, stay hydrated, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers.